Good evening, and thank you for tuning in. Tonight we have special guest Ken Becker. He is a Bigfoot witness, researcher, investigator, lifelong experiencer of the creature. Like myself, he is from Ohio. He's actually from Conneaut, Ohio, and had a Bigfoot encounter 5, 7 miles perhaps from where I had my encounter, I should say. So please give us a hand and welcome Ken on. Good evening, Ken. Thank you for coming. How you doing?
I'm great.
Excellent.
Absolutely. Trying to get my feet where they're not
So
sticking
please
to the
tell us
bottom
a
of
little bit about yourself, how you got started.
Well, I didn't have a choice really. Um, it all started for me when I was about 6 years old. Um, we moved to a house that the backyard went down over something called Clay Hill and then down to the Conneaut Creek, where something called the Arches are. And if anyone's familiar with Conneaut, the Arches was a place where people swam. It's where the Conrail tracks went over the Bessemer and Lake Erie tracks and allowed the creek to flow through down to the dock company where the ore boats come in and unload iron ore to go down to Pittsburgh. They load coal from West Virginia and Pennsylvania back onto the ore boats to take to the different factories and places along the Great Lakes. So we were camping in my side yard, and this is early 80s. Don't freak out. It was early 80s. Little kids were allowed to camp in their side yards. I was walking myself to kindergarten then. It's what happened. It was a safer time. So there behind the house there was a shed. It was an old beat up, just crappy shed, nails sticking out, boards coming off. Didn't have any windows or door. It had holes for them, but there was no glass in there. There was no door on it. I was obsessed with it, and I was forbidden to go and play in this shed, which made it all the more enticing. It made me go, "Oh, I really need to play in that shed." And before this, like ever since we moved into this house, I was getting like hair standing up on the back of my hi Bubba. I was getting the hair standing up on the back of my neck. I kept like feeling like I was being watched. When I would come downstairs to go to the bathroom at night, I kept feeling like there were eyes in the window looking down at me from like the tops of the windows, which I thought I got to be dreaming or this is ridiculous. That stuff doesn't happen. So one night we're camping, my friends and I are camping. My dad went inside the house because he wasn't going to sleep on the hard ground. He went in to go to bed. I'm up, the fire's dying down. It's maybe 2 in the morning, and all my friends are asleep. And I think, that shed's out there. No one's awake to catch me. My dad's inside sleeping. I'm going to go play in the shed. So I go down. I'm messing around in the shed and letting my imagination run wild. And it was the operating room from MASH. It was the classroom from Welcome Back, Kotter. It was one of the starfighters from Buck Rogers. It was a TARDIS at one point. I think that night I was pretending it was the TARDIS because we got Doctor Who reruns on PBS, which was pretty awesome. Tom Baker, by the way, Doctor Number 4, my doctor, for the nerds out there. So I'm in this, and all of a sudden I hear a crack coming from the woods. Now, to orient you, to the back of the shed was to the north, and to the north were the Conrail tracks. The creek and the Bessemer tracks were to the east down through the woods. So there was a window on the east side. There was a door on the south side of it, which I don't know why the door wasn't facing west toward the street and the house, but it was facing, and there was another window facing west. So I had gotten into a habit because I felt like things were watching me through the windows. And I thought maybe I was just paranoid, but I got into the habit of finding the corner of the room that could be seen the least from the windows and making myself really, really small. So I was only 6. how much smaller could I be? But that's what I did. I heard a crack from the woods. I heard heavy footsteps. I got back into, I guess it was the northeast corner of the shed, under the window, drew myself down as small as I could go, closed my eyes, and held my breath. All of a sudden, I could feel like hot breathing. There was a smell that I couldn't quite place, and I knew something was there. I was not opening my eyes at all until I heard like a chuffing sound, like the sound a horse makes when it does that thing with its lips, chuffing sound like that. And all of a sudden, this incredible wave of calmness comes over me. And I thought, okay, I'll look. I stuck my head up. I looked up, and coming through this window, looking at me about probably no more than 10 inches from my face, but probably about 6 inches from my face, was this huge head. I still see it sometimes when I close my eyes to go to sleep at night. It's like burned in there. But the head was almost kind of conical, um, black skin, these eyes that were this kind of deep chocolate brown almost, but they were glinting in the moonlight that was coming down. And when the clouds moved off over the moon and the light came down, I saw silver streaks in the hair. There was hair that came down onto the cheeks. There was like no mustache, but onto the cheeks and down under the chin. Um, Pronounced brow ridge. Just these incredible eyes. And I remember thinking that they were the most beautiful eyes I've ever seen. And they looked like a mom's eyes, like, or a grandma's eyes. They were full of that kind of motherly love, but they were also really, really sad. So I just looked up and I'm staring in those eyes. Um, I don't even know how long I stared into them. It could have been a few seconds, it could have been a few minutes, it could have been an hour. I had absolutely no concept of time. And this is something that would happen to me again in the future with these encounters. Um, but I made a decision. I knew that I would be safe with this creature, whatever it was, and I started to raise my hand up over my head to let her pick me up and take me wherever she wanted to take me, because I knew that I would be safe with her. It was absolute certainty. Then three things happened all at once. The first thing is I heard a train whistle, which meant it was pretty close to 4:30 or 5 o'clock, because that's when the Amtrak train ran through on the Conrail tracks every morning. Um, Funny, when you grow up next to railroad tracks, you don't even hear the trains at night. You get so used to it, it becomes background noise and you don't hear it. But I heard this distinctly. Then I got hit in the chest with something. It was inaudible. I couldn't hear it. There was nothing physical, but it was like getting hit in the chest with a big, heavy puff of air. Um, and then there was a crack coming from the woods. Maybe it was a twig cracking is what I thought. Now I think maybe it was a tree knock of some sort. So all those things happened at the same time. And I had closed my eyes when I raised my hands up. I opened my eyes to see her turn and walk away. She turned with her shoulder, not her neck, but with her shoulders, looked back at me, and I heard two sounds. There was a whoosh, like the exhalation of air, like a whoosh, and then uck, like a burp. Um, I took that to be her name, Whooshuk, because those were or at least that's what I call her, because those were the two sounds that she made, and she walked back into the woods. I probably sat there for a few more minutes before I got brave enough to get up and walk back to the fire and lay down. But yeah, that was my first experience at 6 years old, and it wasn't until about a year later that I realized what I saw, because I was watching In Search of with Leonard Nimoy, and a lot of people that are obsessed with Bigfoot like I am, or are into Bigfoot, that are around my age. Was our first exposure to the Patterson Gimlin film was In Search of with Leonard Nimoy. And I remember watching it and with my friends and saying, "Oh my God, that's it. That's what I saw." No, you're crazy. That's Bigfoot. They don't exist. But that's what I saw. So it's
That's incredible. So, did you, when the Bigfoot was close, did you smell anything?
not really that there was something different in the air, but it wasn't something I could put my finger on. Over the years, from the time I had sightings and encounters from the time I was 16, or not 16, but 6 years old, to the time I was 18 years old, which is about when I stopped going around in the woods. I was spending more time hanging out with my friends, playing video games and partying and things like that. Um, but the smell that I would identify later is a combination of skunk weed, or no, not that skunk weed. People, calm down. I'm not talking about that kind of skunk weed. This is like sometimes it's called skunk cabbage. And when you step through it, when you run through it and break the leaves, it smells like skunk. It's horrible. I guess it's one of those natural things that the plant develops to keep deer from eating it. But skunk weed or skunk cabbage. Daisy, please stop. He's allowed back here. Um, got the dogs up here, and the little, the little Yorkie wants to come back and be close, but my Schnauzer Shih Tzu mix thinks that she owns the office space, and it's her domain. But anyway,
Yeah,
so
she
skunk
does.
cabbage. The smell of, if you've ever been walking along railroad tracks, or maybe even along a road on a hot August day, and you see roadkill that's been tanning in the sun for a few weeks, it gets this kind of musky smell, this musky tanned. I can't explain it other than that. But that, like a deer that's been laying out in the sun for 3 or 4 weeks in August, and then a kind of sickly, sweet, rotting fruit smell. Um, the only thing that I've smelled with that part of it that comes close is if you're at an amusement park and they've had picnics or whatever, and people throw away food, hamburgers, hot dogs, or whatever, with lots of ketchup, and it just starts baking in the sun and starts going really bad. That kind of a sickly sweet smell. So all both those three combined are what I've smelled when I've had other encounters. But at that time, there was something different. I just couldn't place it.
Interesting. Yeah, a lot of people have told me over the years that they smell something. I don't have it particularly. I can barely smell anything on a normal day. So being out in the woods with my allergies, I didn't smell anything
Hmm.
when we got close to it, but I'm always curious if I could smell if I would have. That does, but there seems to be mixed reviews on it. Some people smell something and some don't. So sometimes I wonder if it's one of those things like asparagus, where certain people can smell it and certain people can't, for whatever reason.
Yeah.
Um, Interesting. So now you mentioned you were by the train tracks, and you had an interesting idea about train tracks that you mentioned before we jumped on here. If you want to share that.
Oh yeah. Train tracks, especially through. Hmm, this is a word that I cannot pronounce, so I will spell it out. Rural. I can't say that word. I don't even try anymore because it comes out stupid, and I hate embarrassing myself. But like out in the country, out in the sticks, as I would have said as a kid, especially when it goes through non-urban areas or highway for Bigfoot. Number one, the only traffic you're going to see unless it's going through a town is the train. And they know that the train's coming long before it gets there. You can see the light, you can hear the whistle, you can hear the vibrations, feel the vibrations through the tracks. Like those old westerns where the cowboy would get down and put his ear on the rail to see if a train was coming. Um, they're mostly surrounded by woods, maybe houses occasionally, but it's deep. And a lot of tracks have trestles that go over creeks. So they'll, or rivers, they'll go over water. and water is another superhighway. But the brush can get very thick along the side of a river. Along the train tracks, there are rocks, there are railroad ties. You're not going to leave footprints. These are very smart creatures. I'm still up in the air with one of two theories as to what they are. Um, but they're very intelligent creatures that know when they leave footprints. That's why sometimes you only see one or two, and then they move to more solid ground where they're not leaving as many. So yeah, they use that to find food. They use that to get from one place to another. And it's easy because if a train comes, they just slip into the woods, slip down off the tracks. The engineer's not really looking except to see what's directly in front of them. And they can go from city to city, from place to place without being seen. So it would make a lot of sense that there were two of them there. That's a convergence of two tracks, plus the creek, plus the lake was maybe a mile up from where the arches are. So just that convergence of all those different ways of traveling would have made that a prime spot.
I agree. That makes a lot of sense. I think that I feel the same way about streams and rivers and lakes. I think that they travel through the water. I imagine a lot of sighting seems to be within a relative distance of water. And,
Yeah.
you go deep enough in the woods, you're going to find water somewhere, anyways. But, assuming they're biological, I would assume they would have the same requirement for water we do. They would need a certain
Oh,
amount of
absolutely.
water. I assume they would use it for some kind of hygiene. And like you mentioned earlier, too, they're probably all the fish.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Fish and other animals like deer, raccoons, rabbits, squirrels. They all need water as well. So they're all going to go to a pond or to a creek or to a small lake to drink. And where there's food, you're going to find a predator, whether it's a
Yeah,
Bigfoot
absolutely.
or a mountain lion or a coyote or a wolf or a bear. They're going to go where the food is.
Yeah, I agree. I think there's a definite, I don't know if pattern is the right word. I guess consistency of sightings and water, and it seems to fit, as far as how they travel. Because I sometimes wonder how do they get, for example, out by Canton, or actually the most recent one in Monroe, Michigan, that we had in this area. You know, how how would it have gotten either so far north of Ohio out of the woods or so far south from the rural area part of Michigan without getting seen until it got to Monroe?
Right. And
But
tracks, creeks,
so
rivers, farmland.
yeah, I personally think that they have I don't know if I don't know if migration is the right word. I think they're somewhat nomadic. I think they don't
Mm,
exhaust a particular food source in any given area. I don't know how often they move or how many numbers there are. It's just my hypothesis that they travel, and that's part of the reason you never see them too. Is that's why they're good at avoiding us and be constantly moving,
right.
especially if they have some kind of a pattern. I would think with mating as well, just interacting with other, I don't know if packs or clans or groups perhaps would be the best word, of Sasquatch. But otherwise, you're going to have a breakdown in the genetic pool.
Right.
But so you had mentioned that your first encounter was, excuse me, it was sticks, but you've had more since.
Yeah, the second encounter was on my 12th birthday, um, March 11th, 1986. And I remember it distinctly because I got a telescope. I was like, oh, cool, a telescope. But my birthday party was at 3 or 4 in the afternoon. It's still daylight. How am I going to look at the stars? So I was like, guys, I have an idea. And my friends and I all run down to the end of the street. I lived in a different house, but still along the Conneaut Creek, still along with at the end of the street was the Bessemer and Lake Erie Railroad tracks. But now I was where, as the other place, I was just south, or just south of the Conrail tracks. This time I'm just south of, at the time, Norfolk and Western. It was originally Nickel Plate Railroad for train buffs out there, and now it's Norfolk and Southern. the same railroad that had the spill in Ohio a couple years ago with the chemicals. So yeah, that railroad, Norfolk and Southern. Um, so we're in a different house, but still in that general area. I'm probably not even a mile away from where my original sighting was. So we go down, I set up the telescope, we're looking through it across the creek, see if we can see any animals. And I saw this large, dark, hairy object move across my field of view. And I was trying to get it focused in. I went, what the? And then my best friend, Ted, bumps me out of the way and goes, my turn. And he looks through it and he goes, oh my God, is that? What is that? Did you see that? And I said, yeah, I saw it. And we look at my father, or we go back, we talk to my father, who is probably the most liberal minded, open minded person, adult that we knew at the time, and said, we think we saw Bigfoot. He was running down there. His answer, and I will never forget this, his answer was, oh, that wasn't a Bigfoot. It was probably one of the tall black men in town in a fur coat down there fishing at the creek. That's what you saw. What? No. But first of all, it was unseasonably warm spring day. Why would he be wearing a full-length fur coat that looked like a ghillie suit? For one, it didn't even look like a fur coat. Why would he be doing that? And there was no fishing rod, there was no fishing tackle, and he was running through the woods, taller than any dude I've ever seen. And one of my friends from kindergarten and Head Start, his older brother Doug was like 6'6", 6'7". So I knew how tall he was compared, and I'd been down to that part of the creek many times. I knew how tall the trees were. This thing was not 6'7". This thing was like 7.5, 8 feet at least. So yeah, that, and then it continued from there. We'd go camping down by along the Conneaut Creek, down by Old Mill Road Bridge. So we had a couple of different campsites there. Um, just to throw a few of the experiences out. We were playing a game called Ambush, which is basically hide and seek, but one person is it, and you to get someone out, you have to tackle them, and then they're on your team. The term ambush comes from the fact that once you get enough people on your team and there's fewer people left hiding, you can flush them out into an ambush where they get tackled and are out of the game. So I found a great hiding spot. I slid down the bank toward the creek. I had prickers over top of me. I had rollover. I was on my back looking, and I saw this maybe 6.5 feet tall, obviously female, um, bipedal creature walk between me and the creek. And as she was walking, she turned her head and her shoulders to stare directly at me before turning back and moving on. We had rocks thrown into the center of our campfire. We thought it was coming from the cemetery up on the hill. It wasn't. It was coming from deeper in the woods. They were flying through the canopy, dead center in our campfire. Numerous rocks. My friend Billy went out and like army crawled to try and find out who the kids were that were doing it. Couldn't find anything. He said all I did was smell like skunk and rotten food. That's the only thing. So I came back. Um, oh, my favorite one was a juvenile Bigfoot, maybe in his teens, because if you listen to people who like, not people like Moneymaker, and I'm sorry, I don't mean to offend anyone with that, but I just can't take Matt Moneymaker seriously. Um, we talked a little bit ago about being migratory. You think they're migratory. Well, that's one of the biggest problems I had with finding Bigfoot is they went a week or 2 weeks after a sighting to an area expecting it to still be there. Some of the areas Bigfoot are known to be solitary or only in pairs, but so they're going to move on. They're going to move on from that area because they are migratory, I believe. So no wonder you can't find them. But um, where was it? Oh, my favorite experience was a juvenile Bigfoot. you talk to people who are serious about studying these creatures and listening to reports. Young Bigfoot, especially teenagers, love to screw with people. If you're hiding, you're playing hide and seek. My friend Ted had an experience where he was with a church group playing ambush, and one of them reached out a hand to where he was hiding to try and touch him. This one, every time we went camping, I went to the Golden Dawn and I bought a big 2 pound, like a bread bag full of mini powdered donuts. They were $1.99 for 2 pounds of powdered donuts. You can't get that today. You get a 10-ounce bag of Hostess or Dolly Madison or whatever for $2.50. $1.99, 2 pounds of donuts. That was our breakfast. I was like, I got the donuts, guys. I got them. We always had Faygo soda, hot dogs, and donuts. We'd bring other stuff too, but those were our staples. Every morning we'd wake up, the donuts would be gone, the bag out in the woods somewhere, and we always blamed each other. We always attacked each other. Until one night, my friend Ted, a lot of these experiences happen with Ted. I talk about him a lot. He saw something standing over me. Now, initially, when it happened, he told me he thought it was a fisherman. Later, he said, "Oh, yeah, I think that was a Bigfoot standing over you." And it was eating the powdered donuts, ripped the bag open, eating powdered donuts. He saw it walk away, eating powdered donuts, and throw the bag out into the woods. And I saw somebody say on one of the Bigfoot pages on Facebook one time that Bigfoot won't eat your food. Bigfoot doesn't come into campsites and eat food. I beg to differ. I'm out probably over the lifetime of camping, $50 worth of powdered donuts that a juvenile Bigfoot ate and stole. That guy owes me some cash. I don't care how I get it. He can Venmo, whatever. But yeah. And then, I mean, little things like that. We used to hear screams that we assumed was a rabbit getting torn up by a fox or something, because rabbits do make noise when they're dying. They will scream. But this was different. We thought it was a bird, a pheasant or something. But it was like a blood curdling woman's scream. As I got older and started listening to accounts and watching YouTube videos on the subject, I learned that sometimes a Bigfoot will scream like a woman, like a human woman in danger, to draw people in. We've heard grunts, we've heard howls, we've heard wood knocks. One time my friends were walking through the woods and I didn't feel like walking along the stream bed through Hogsback that they were walking through, so I was going to walk around to the meeting point, and I heard a crack and something fly above my head through the tree. I thought somebody was shooting a gun, so I took off running. As I was older, I realized it was probably a wood knock and something throwing a rock at me to get me out of the way as a warning. And that brings us to what I call the big experience, where it was multiple friends. I think there were about 5 or 6 of us. There was me, obviously, Ted, my friend Billy, my friend Jimmy, who's a big dude. He's like 6'5", 300 pounds in high school. Star football tackle on both sides, on offense and defense. One of if his grades would have been better, he could have probably played at a Division 1A school or at least a Division 1 AA. He was that good, but he just didn't have the grades. But he was there. His little stepbrother Mark was there, and I don't know if Paul was there or not, but it's irrelevant. So we're walking through the woods. We had been in the woods in Hogsback all day. We were tearing down what we thought were people making lean-tos. We were pushing over trees, just having a good time, making a lot of noise. I realize now that what we were tearing down were probably markers. They were probably, or what some investigators call structures. So we were tearing those down, pushing away. We were going home. Instead of going around, there was a long path that probably would have taken us an extra 10 minutes to go out and around and then onto the road to go across the highway to Jimmy's house. We thought, we'll go up and over the hill. That's a shortcut. It's fine. So we come out, we cross over this little stream we called Hogs Run, where the old ice house was down there in the woods. We start to go up the hill and we hear, like, we just stop dead. Like, everybody plows into each other. It was, again, one of those things where I didn't hear it, but I felt something hit me in the chest to stop me. And we all froze and we look up. There is probably, we went back weeks later to try and figure out how tall the branch was. And this thing was probably 9.5 feet, standing up on two legs, holding a branch and shaking it like crazy. We were frozen. Like, I couldn't move. This is another time where time became absolutely meaningless to me because I don't know how long we stood there. He's shaking this branch. He's making sublingual noises, like, that we can't even hear, but we can feel them. We can feel getting hit with these, like this pressure hitting us. And the only thing I've seen that even comes close to that is I was watching an episode of Jeff Corwin, and he was in Africa and there was a bull elephant. And he said, I know you can't hear what this elephant is saying right now, but he is rumbling at such a low frequency that I can feel my bones shaking. That's what it was. We felt it in our bones. Then at one point, I don't know if it was one of us or if it was all of us at the same time, but somebody yelled, run. And we all took off. Now, the first thing I did was I moved laterally from Jimmy, because Jim had a rule that I don't have to be the fastest. I just have to be faster than one of you to not get caught. Whether we were causing trouble in a neighborhood, whether, we were doing light vandalizing of pulling people's flowers out of flower beds. I don't have to be faster than all of you. I just have to be faster than one of you. The first thing he did was reach out his arm, grab one of us, and throw us down. That happened to be Mark, who he threw in the stream. Mark jumps up out of the stream and takes off. He's like 3-4 years younger than us, but he was the fastest, and he took off like a shot, running just past all of us, soaking wet. Jimmy's running. I ran away from Jim and then forward. We get out around. I don't remember much. I remember looking back as I was running, and I saw this thing turn. It did not drop down on four legs. It turned around on two legs and walked, just like Patty in the Patterson-Gimlin film. It walked back into the woods. We ran. I remember, the next thing I remember is waking up on the floor of Jimmy's house, of his bedroom, with the lights out, peeking out the window to see if the thing was coming after us. I didn't realize how much time had passed. Apparently, we didn't go left toward Jimmy's house. We turned right up through East Conneaut, over the viaduct to my house to talk to my father, because, again, the most reasonable, open-minded adult we knew, or thought so. And he said, it was probably a bear. Okay. People often, they'll steal bears or something from over in Pennsylvania and bring them over here and let them loose. It was probably a bear. So I guess we were disheartened and walked all the way back to Jimmy's. And then I remember coming out of that fugue state and being on the floor of the bedroom, and we were talking about it. Now, Ted and I have talked about this experience for years. I don't know if Mark remembers it. I talk to him on Facebook occasionally, but I've never talked to him about it. Polly, I don't think Polly was there. Bill hasn't said anything about remembering, but Jim and I didn't talk for almost 30 years after high school. We drifted apart, and I moved away. I didn't know how to get a hold of him. Saw that his girlfriend was on Facebook. I wished him a happy birthday every year. His birthday's 2 days after mine, so we always celebrated together. And his girlfriend had finally messaged me and said, I've been watching you. You're not crazy. You're not far to this side of the political spectrum or this side of the political spectrum. And I think you would be good for Jimmy to talk to again. So she's like gatekeeping for me or something. But I thought it was cool because Jimmy had his own issues through adulthood. And God love him. He's clean and sober. He has gone through recovery, and he's living a very healthy life now. So I'm so proud of him. But we started talking again. And one of the things he said to me out of the blue was, I don't want to sound like I'm crazy, but did we see a Bigfoot in Hogsback one time when we were kids, about 16 years old. It was up on a hill shaking a tree. I was like, oh my God, dude, are you serious right now? He's like, I'm sorry. I knew I imagined it. I was like, no, we saw it. We saw it. The first thing you did was grab Mark and throw him down. He's like, yeah, I was looking at Jill's Facebook and oh no, why have I lost connection?
I can still hear you. It's just the video.
Okay, my camera crapped out for some reason, but all right, you can still hear me. That's fine.
Yes.
So he said, I saw that thing you posted on Facebook. Jill showed it to me about having that one friend that when you're running from the cops will just reach out and throw you down so he can get away, and you would be the. And he's like, and that made me think, did I do that in the woods when we saw a Bigfoot? So yeah, I was like, yeah, you did that to Mark. He's like, oh my God, dude, don't ever post that again. But he remembered, completely independent of me, completely independent. And I was like, that's crazy that I don't even have to bring it up, that you're just sitting there saying, hey, we saw this, didn't we? Let's see it, unplugging it, and plugging it back in will work. So yeah, it was just this total ridiculous indication of, yeah, I can't get it to come back up. That I wasn't alone in seeing this and this happening. So, but because of those experiences as a kid, I started watching, like, Patterson Gimlin, obviously, but I started watching movies. Um, One of the first movies I ever saw was um, Sasquatch: The Legend of Bigfoot, not the Ivan Marks Legend of Bigfoot movie, although I did see that one too, but the one where it was a docudrama where you are looking at these guys riding on horseback up to, it was filmed in Oregon, but they said they were going to British Columbia to view or to try and find a Bigfoot or Sasquatch. And a lot of times in the movie, you're seeing things from like a first person, like, I guess from a first person shooter point of view, to put it in video game terms, of it looking down on these guys riding. So, um, yeah, you're looking through the eyes of the Bigfoot. So that was one of the first movies I saw, and the howls that it did. The howls that it did was like, oh my God, this is what we've heard in the woods. So it's just, yeah, that's, let me see if I can.
So the other guys that you were with, are they all Bigfoot enthusiasts as well, or did some of them just kind of
Ted is.
paper off?
Well, Jimmy. Let me see. Yeah, let me try to apply this and get at least a picture of my face up there, because I'm that big. Oh no, that didn't work. I guess I should have moved it over. Jimmy has been obsessed with Bigfoot since his Uncle Jerry showed us. And it was with Uncle Jerry at 7 years old that I watched um the the In Search Of with Leonard Nimoy showing the Patterson Gimlin film. So he sends me Bigfoot videos all the time. Ted is actually out there doing the research. He started off his page, and I'm gonna plug out his page. It's T Max American Experience on both Facebook and YouTube. And he started out just doing hiking videos. Just, that's all he was doing, was hiking videos. And it turned out he had some experiences while he was hiking. He's had rocks thrown at him. He's had vocalizations. He's had wood knocks. And he shifted from hiking videos to now he goes out at night and does research in areas all around Ohio and Pennsylvania. He's been to Jumbo Woods. He's been all through Hogsback. He's been to State Road Covered Bridge south of Conneaut. He's been over into Pennsylvania by Turkey Creek, over near, your old stomping grounds. He's been all over the place doing investigations. He goes out there with some friends that have Bigfoot channels as well. They've used Therm. He's gotten things on Therm. So he's very much into the active research role of it. My role for um, his his channel is um, to look at the videos, analyze them, and then put my thoughts up on both his channel and my channel. So that's how I just haven't gotten to it yet. I'm lazy. Um, and I find so many other things to do with my day. To be fair, over the summer, I had the grandkids here every day. I was babysitting the grandkids every day during the summer until school started. So I just couldn't find time when I was entertaining them. But yeah, that's one of the plans going future is to help with that. But I don't. Ted is very much into the research side. Jimmy's into the video side. As you could see previously behind me, um, I'm very much into the whole thing. I've totally immersed myself. I've been to the Bigfoot Festival in West Virginia, in Sutton. My favorite artist, and my now I can call him my friend, is Timothy Wayne Williams. If you ever see him on the Bigfoot pages on Facebook, he does paintings, oil paintings, and he hides a Bigfoot in them. He also does other cryptids and aliens and stuff. It's great. I have one of his paintings as one of my treasured possessions. I have his book, which is pretty cool. I got to meet Dr. Meldrum last year, and then this year I had him sign a copy of his book for me. So
Nice. Good for you.
I'm very much into like meeting people and talking to people, and throughout the Bigfoot community. By the way, and this is just personal, I used to think very highly of Lyle Blackburn, the quote unquote expert on Boggy Creek. He was talking to someone. I stood there with my grandkids at the Bigfoot Festival for over 20 minutes waiting for him to finish, not wanting to be rude and interrupt, waiting for him to finish so I could talk to him and introduce him to the grandkids because I'm trying to get them into Bigfoot too. And he just went, "Hey, buddy," and walked away from me. And I know he saw me standing there for 20 minutes. I was like, "Okay, I'm done with you. You're not on my list anymore." But you find great people, you find crappy people in the community.
It's definitely a diverse community. Um, I'm curious, especially since you've had so many sightings. What do you think they are? Where do you think they come from?
Okay, I have two thoughts. First of all, I will preface this by saying I do not mean to offend the people who believe this, but I do not believe that Bigfoot is an alien or has alien technology. I do not believe that Bigfoot is interdimensional, and I do not believe that Bigfoot uses portals to get around. I am very skeptical, and I told you in like before we went on that there are four types of people I believe in the Bigfoot community. There are unbelievers. These are people who are not going to believe no matter what evidence. You could bring a living Bigfoot there, kill it in front of them, and dissect it, and this person will still not believe that Bigfoot exists. There is the skeptic. The skeptic does not believe. Think of Renee from Finding Bigfoot. She doesn't believe, but with enough evidence, she could be convinced. And if you watch that show enough, you'll see her begging for something real to happen because she wants to believe. She just has a skeptic's instinct that it has to have enough evidence. It has to have concrete evidence. Then there is the believer. This is your map moneymaker. This is the guy that every sound, whether it was that oil pump or a natural gas pump making that rhythmic noise, whether it's a deer on the therm, whether it's a chipmunk throwing an acorn at your head from the top of a tree, that's a squatch. Every single thing to him is a squatch. Believers believe everything is a squatch. They believe every hoax is a squatch. They will put Todd standing on a pedestal so high that he can barely breathe because they believe every single one of his videos and his quote unquote evidence is real. I don't believe it is. I believe that he has hoaxed. He wants so hard for people to believe that he's ruined his own reputation by it. And then the last one are knowers. These are people that are either skeptics or believers who have seen enough evidence to know without a doubt that this creature exists, or someone that's seen the creature face to face. You've seen it, you've looked at it, you've felt the presence. And that's what I am. I'm a knower. I've seen it, I've seen the evidence. But I'm also very skeptical. I want the evidence to be profound. I want it to be beyond reproach. I analyze videos. I get goosebumps when I watch Patty, the Patterson Gimlin film. If something is real, or I believe it's real, or my system, my subconscious believes it's real, I will get goosebumps. There was a video I watched where Bigfoot was climbing up a hill near a ski town through some pine trees, and the kids looked out their window, had their camera going, and were like, "Hey, Bigfoot!" And it darted behind a tree and peeked out at them. That's classic behavior. I don't think it was a guy in a suit because I got goosebumps watching it. So my body said, "Oh, dude, that's real. That's totally real." Um, so yeah, I believe that Bigfoot is a biological creature, and it's one of two things. It's either an extant and adapted or evolved over the last 200,000 years or 20,000 years or whatever it is since the last one was seen. Gigantopithecus, the giant orangutan looking ape that you'll see in museums sometimes. Or it is an extant early species of hominin, another offshoot of humans like Homo erectus or Homo superior or Homo neanderthalis. It's not Homo sapiens. It's not the Cro-Magnons that developed into us, but it is another branch of human species. Um, Maybe Homo sasquatchius or something like that. I don't know, but Homo bigfootius, whatever you'd wanted to call it. But it's one of those two things. It is very real. It is very biological. It has somehow missed being discovered. And people, well, why have we never found a body? Well, I think that it's smart enough to bury its dead. I believe that they probably bury their dead. Other species of ape, and which humans are apes, so other species of great ape have been known to bury their dead. At least with some chimpanzees, they will cover it with. They won't necessarily dig a hole, but they'll cover it with debris, leaf litter, rocks, so that other predators can't get to the body. So they honor the dead that way. Some gorillas have been known to actually scoop out dirt and toss the dead body in the ground and cover it up with rocks and leaves and dirt. So I think they bury their dead. There is often talk of mind speak where you're in the woods and you get a mental picture of what's going on, either to be afraid or to run or to I don't believe that that's actually a psychic ability. I believe it's pheromones. I believe that the odd thing that I smelled with that first encounter with that adult, older, because she had gray streaks in her hair, female Bigfoot at 6 years old, were pheromones. She sent me a pheromone scent to calm me. That's why I couldn't place the smell. That's why it was kind of weird for me, but it calmed me down. She sent me a pheromone that said I would be safe. So I would raise my arms and get picked up. Now, I know somebody out there is going to ask, well, why would he need to be told that he would be safe, and why would she want him to come with her? Was she going to eat him or whatever? At the time, there was a very bad man who was the van driver for Head Start. I went to Head Start. My sisters both went to Head Start. My brother went to Head Start. When my brother was in Head Start, I think when my sister, the younger of my two sisters as well, he was the van driver. He had convinced my parents that since my one grandfather was in Florida and my other grandfather had passed away, regardless of the fact that my friend Jimmy's grandfather was my grandfather for all intents and purposes, he adopted me. He gave me a safe space because of this man. This man would take me fishing, quote unquote, into the woods, and things happened that should never happen to anyone, let alone a child. I think that she saw this and she wanted to keep me safe. She didn't trust other humans. And I tell people, as crazy as it sounds, the feeling I got, and with all the times I was in the woods by myself, alone, and the birds would stop chirping, the animals would stop moving, but I never felt afraid. I think she protected me. And as crazy as it sounds, I think she adopted me. And that's where I lose half the audience listening, where they're like, adopted by a Bigfoot? That boy's crazy. But I think that was the pheromones. That was the scent she was sending out. Animals do it all the time for love or mating or fear. They'll send out something to make people afraid or to run, or to other animals. They'll send out a pheromone to calm certain animals when they're going to jump on them and eat them. So I believe that it's completely biological. They are an extant ape of some sort, whether Gigantopithecus or an offshoot of the Homo genus, and that they don't have mind speak. It's just pheromones that make you feel a certain way, and the way our brains work, our human brain chemistry makes pictures out of it.
That is an interesting approach to the mind speak. And as far as the pheromones, I mean, we don't. The truth is, we don't really know that much about their physiology. We have limited witnesses to their behavior, so there's so much we don't know about them. So I'm not saying it's out of the question at all that it could have seen that you were in a sensitive spot and wanted to protect you. Just a decent thing to do. It does seem that they are intelligent and perhaps have compassion and empathy. And
Right.
for that matter, I mean, there's videos if you go on YouTube or Facebook, TikTok, whatever. Like dogs will raise chickens or pigs, you know what I mean, to act like dogs. Dogs will adopt other
Right.
animals. You know, they kind of, so that's not unheard of in the animal kingdom. And we are animals, essentially. We might look different than the rest of them and have thumbs, but beyond that, you know, we are still animals. So that's not necessarily out of the question, I wouldn't think, for it to take some kind of interest.
Right. Yeah. And
And
to borrow a phrase oft used by a certain podcaster who a majority of the Bigfoot community seems to be obsessed with, I don't have a Bigfoot in my garage studying it. So, I don't know. People that listen to him will know what I'm talking about.
yeah, I mean, and then that's really, that is the long and short of it, is there are so many things we don't know, we don't understand about their behavior. I mean, the fact that you had so many sightings while living in that area, it almost does seem like they were interested in you, or you and your friends, or there's some reason that they interacted with you guys comfortably, I guess.
They are absolutely, if you listen to some of the reports and some of the sightings, they, like the woman on Finding Bigfoot that lived near a playground, and she'd take her kids to the playground, and the females would come out and watch the kids playing. They are absolutely obsessed with children. If you listen to, what is it, Missing 411,
Yeah.
about, people disappearing. Oftentimes when Polides tells the stories, when he talks about children coming up missing, they will reappear days or weeks later, absolutely unharmed, not malnourished, not dehydrated. They will be brought back to safety. So if it's a Bigfoot taking them, then maybe they're taking care of the children. That kid in North Carolina that disappeared in the swamp, or was it South Carolina, that disappeared in the swamp and said his friend Bear kept him safe for 3 days, and then took him back out, and everybody's like, oh, there was a big bear that must have been a she bear that took care of him. It was probably a Bigfoot that he just called Bear, because that was his frame of reference. It looked like a bear. But I listen to guys like, Dr. Meldrum, who, they say never meet your heroes, but I did, and he was everything I had hoped he would be and more. He was the sweetest man. He talked to my grandkids. He explained things to them. He listened to their questions. He engaged with them and made them feel important while they were talking to him, meeting him. And I love him for that. But I've read the research by Dr. Ketchum, Dr. Melba Ketchum. I've watched, I told you earlier, probably over 10,000 YouTube videos of Bigfoot sightings and Bigfoot videos, and people analyzing Bigfoot videos. Guys like Thinker Thunker put in the hard work with measuring angles and proportions and things like that. But yeah, there's just a lot of stuff out there that I just try to absorb. I listen to a lot of different podcasts. I listen to witness reports. My buddy Ted, who does the research now on his channels, he's a former Air Force tech sergeant, and that's how he introduces every episode of his videos. This is Tech Sergeant Mackey here talking to you, but he was also a prison guard, so for many years. He's not prone to making up wild stories. He's used to delivery. He's used to dealing in facts, evidence. I think he was an MP, or whatever the Air Force equivalent is of an MP for a while when he was serving in the reserves. But he's been to Afghanistan a few times. He's not prone to making things up. He said he was talking to some Army guys that had actually been there when the Giant of Kandahar happened, and he said, I looked into their eyes, Ken. I looked into their eyes. They were not lying or making things up. And I talked to a few of them separately, and their stories were not identical. They were not exactly the same, but they were consistent. So I know they weren't rehearsed. So the evidence is out there. It's just a matter of putting in the footwork to look it all up.
Well, and I think that's the biggest hindrance too, is all of the people out there, we're not documenting things in the way that we should be. We're probably contaminating samples, things like that. There's a certain scientific method that probably needs to be implemented to get the right kind of to a lab, which is another struggle, because I feel like even though it's getting better, it does seem like there's a stigma in the scientific community. I know, just going from conference to conference every year, talking to people, sometimes you'll see somebody, oh, I work at a laboratory. I don't really like to talk about it. If anyone finds out at work, I'll be blackballed, that kind of thing. But that's what we need. We need somebody with access to a laboratory that can take a sample of DNA and say, okay, it doesn't match anything. I'm not saying it's a Bigfoot. We're just saying it's an unknown species that doesn't exist. It's not human. It's not primate, but it has characteristics of both.
Right. And
that hopefully.
Yeah. The issues with Dr. Melba's research is that the journal that she posted her findings in was a journal she started. So, you got to kind of take that with a grain of salt. But God love Dr. Meldrum. Dr. Meldrum, he even gave Todd Standing a fair shake, and he said something did happen out there. I did see something. I can't confirm what it was, but something did happen while I was. I don't doubt that Todd's seen things. I don't doubt that he has credible evidence somewhere in his films. But the stuff that he just made up and hoaxed to either get attention or whatever is just, why? You have just totally discredited yourself, dude. And then doubling down and screaming people down for doubting him and his evidence, that's not the way to get people to believe you. And that's the skeptic in me talking. And I try to use common sense, but come on.
I think it's important to be skeptical. We all have to be objective. We have to accept the possibility that what we find is not what we thought it was. There's a lot of challenges now, especially with AI out there, where it looks so real. Like you could reach out and touch it, but it's computer generated. And unfortunately, there's people that just like to screw with us and put stuff out there that's not necessarily real. But that's just going to be one of the challenges that we're going to have to overcome. I think the other challenge is there is no real credible, peer-reviewed platform for people to share evidence or share their hypotheses or share their theories. And that's one of the always, when I talk to skeptics, that's one of always the big things that I hear is they say, well, there's no peer review. They're right. There's not. There is no dedicated leading body that decides what is more likely to be credible versus not.
Because it's such a stigma.
Yeah,
It's such a stigma to be a believer in the scientific community.
and that's a shame too, because you figure of the tens of thousands of sightings that occur every year, probably only half, maybe 30-40% get reported, you know, and every sighting has a clue. There's some piece of information, even if it's matches someone else's description and experience almost identical, which is actually would almost be better because then we have a pattern. Okay, this area, these people have had these encounters. It's the same experience, just a different human.
Right. And
And
with
but people don't report it, so we're missing all these data points.
yeah, and with Northeast Ohio in that area, and we always call it Bigfoot. We're not like I see all these things. Oh, Ohio, it's called the Grass Man. I have never called it the Grass Man in my life. It's always
I
been
never
a
have
Bigfoot to
either.
me. But I think of it like the other thing because it just makes sense in my head is that people describe it looking differently. Well, yeah, maybe it's like the Grassman, Sasquatch, Bigfoot's a general term like dog, right? And Sasquatch might be a Great Dane, Grassman might be a Golden Retriever, Swamp Ape or Skunk Ape might be a Chihuahua, whatever the Skookum might be a German Shepherd. So maybe it's like dogs and the different names for the Bigfoot or the different appearances are different subspecies or different. I don't want to call them breeds, but that's the best analogy that works.
Well, I
So
mean,
maybe they're like
look at
different
us.
breeds. Well,
Sure,
yeah,
but look at us. Where
humans
some
are
of us
so
are
different.
taller, some are short. We
Yeah,
look different. We
we call them breeds, call them races. It's the same thing. But
so
then also their their behaviors are different. Like Sasquatch in the Pacific Northwest is basically solitary. They probably get together with females to mate. The females will raise the kids, and then the kids will go off on their own. Up in and they're a little nicer than the ones up in British Columbia that are very territorial. But then you move down to swamp apes, and you might see two or three of them together in Florida in the Everglades or whatever. So it's small groups. But then you look in along the Appalachian Mountains specifically, like in Northeast Ohio, in through Pennsylvania, like Cook's Forest area, um, down in West Virginia, into Tennessee, the Carolinas, Virginia, and even going northward along the Appalachian Mountains, they are very much family units. There is a dominant male. There are at least one or two adult male sentinels. There are several females to raise children. Um, One might be an older matriarchal female that was maybe the dominant male's mother that's still around because take care of your elderly. Good lesson for humans. And then there are children. There are infants and toddlers and juveniles, like teenagers, all in this family group. It may be a dozen, maybe up to 20 in an area, but the area has to have abundant food, abundant water, and abundant, shelter to be able to escape people trying to find you or just seeing you randomly. And that doesn't always happen, but when it does, it's a very quick glimpse. It's always one walking away. You never see the family groups together. I think what we were trying to do going up and over that hill that night, that the sentinel was shaking the tree at us, was we were going to walk dead into a nesting site. We were going to walk right into where they were nesting for the night. He was out watching to make sure he scared us away. We weren't in any danger, but they were trying to guide us away, to get us out of that area and go a different way. Had we gone up within the next few days instead of waiting weeks because we were so scared, but had we gone up, we might have found those flattened nests. And I've seen those in the woods. And I usually assume they're deer, but sometimes the grass looks like it's woven, like pieces of grass look woven together. That doesn't happen naturally when a deer flops down for the night. So, maybe they live in family units or call them tribes or whatever. They would have to for breeding purposes. And maybe the ones out west are more solitary just because of tradition or Maybe those are the ones out hunting to bring back to a family unit that's deeper in the woods that we can't see. I don't know, but I mean, these are things that make sense in my brain, putting them with like other animals. And then the other thing, what I was saying earlier, is why haven't we found a body? I have never seen a dead bear in the woods. Never. And I've been through a lot of woods where there have been bears. I live in bear country now in Western Maryland. I have never seen a dead deer in the woods. I've seen them along a highway where they've been hit. I've seen them along the tracks where they've gotten run over by trains, but I've never seen one naturally in the woods. I've never seen a dead squirrel, a dead fox, a dead rabbit, nothing. Where do the bodies go? Why haven't we found any bodies in the woods naturally of these dead animals? And if you listen to credible park rangers who spend their entire lives in the woods, a good 99+% of them have never found a dead bear in the woods. They've seen live bears, but never a dead one, unless it was from poaching. So why would we find a dead Sasquatch in the woods? It's either being buried or predation from scavengers. Raccoons love bones. Birds love hair for nests. A fox or a coyote isn't above tearing the flesh off of a body. It happens with humans all the time. We find humans because we wear synthetic clothing that doesn't biodegrade very well.
That and half of us are made of plastic anymore, so
Yeah,
there's always going to be something
pretty
left
much.
for about 1,000,000 years. Yeah, I agree completely. I've spent years going through the woods, and I've never come across a dead deer, dead bear. Hell, I've never come across a dead raccoon. Maybe the occasional rabbit or squirrel, and that's few and far between over a lifetime. Probably less than half a dozen. And other than circumstances where you see a squirrel hitting on the road or something like that, you just tend to see them. But it seems like that. And there's videos where they do experiments and you can watch them, but it looks like anywhere, at least in the videos that I've watched, from 1 to 3 weeks, the recently deceased animal will go from completely intact to nothing within 1 to 3 weeks, depending on the environment, time of year, things like that.
Right. And
And
in woods where Bigfoot are seen most often, whether they're rainforests or along the Allegheny Passage, um, it's very humid. There's a lot of rain, especially in the spring and the fall, and a lot of water from the snow in the wintertime. So that's going to biodegrade really quick.
yeah, and the fact that we don't, as you mentioned earlier, they could very well be something with their dead that we're unaware of. Oftentimes, when gorillas come to pass or they near death, they'll leave the pod and they'll go somewhere else, and they'll climb up into a tree away from the rest of them as a safety, so they don't attract predators to the group. So we don't know enough about Sasquatch to say for 100% sure that's what they're doing, but there's certainly a number of possibilities that would explain why we haven't found a body yet.
Right.
And I think with technology, we've got drone technology, we have thermal cameras, infrared cameras, pretty much any kind of camera you can imagine can be strapped to a drone. So it's just a matter of time before we get another breakthrough. I mean, what we really need is another Patterson film.
Yeah.
We need it caught,
Definitely.
on even if it's a phone video, something that can be sent to an expert in editing and video analyst, and just say, no, this is an original film, whatever. We just need somebody to say the video itself is real. Whatever is on the video, you can't say either way, but the video itself is real. It's not AI. It's not any kind of computer generated hoax. Whatever was on that video, something was out in those woods. Questions, what is it?
Right. And
But
with drones, we're getting more and more sightings. Not very good ones, because honestly, you can hear a drone a mile away. The same thing with trail cam. Well, why aren't trail cams picking them up? Some are, but trail cams have an electronic hum. I can't hear it now that I'm older, but when I was younger with the old CRT model, like computer screens and TVs, when you turn it on, there was a high pitched hum, an electronic hum. Animals can hear that if they're, you know, our system as humans has become lazy because we're relying more on our brain and other sensations. So we don't have that animal hearing anymore like we used to. I think Bigfoot still do. They're going to hear the trail cam taking a picture of something else and be like, okay, I'm going to avoid that. The one that I think is very credible was the one I think was from the National Park Service of the trail cam right above an eagle's nest that caught the Bigfoot down below walking around. I think that was pretty credible because there's no way he could have heard it that high up. And he didn't even look up towards it. He was just wandering around doing his business. And that did not look like a guy in a suit to me. I think one of the things that's really hurt the Bigfoot research as far as fuzzy pictures and bad video are cell phones. Cell phones have cameras, so that's what we take into the woods with us, and we get shaky. But there are better, even a cheap $100 video camera, which I have mine somewhere, I just can't find it. It's in a box somewhere, has image stability for if you're not using a tripod. And I've got like a 26x zoom on that. I think I maybe have a 5x zoom on my phone. But a 26x zoom, I was at a wedding, pointed it down and zoomed in on an ant hill. I could see into the ant hill and see the ants in the ground moving around. It was the coolest thing because I was able to zoom in. That's almost a very light duty microscope, a 26x zoom. So you can get better cameras to take into the woods with you. We are just lazy and assume our cell phone is going to do the work. I've got the iPhone 73. It's got 5 cameras on it. It'll take a great picture. No, it won't. You're still holding it in a shaky hand without image stabilization. You're scared. Your adrenaline's pumping. No wonder it looks blurry. You're doing that. And my Daisy, my Schnauzer Shih Tzu mix, I don't think, other than maybe a handful, I've ever gotten a good picture of her without some part of her body moving. Even if she looks like she's sitting still, you get the picture and it's blurred because she's moving. If they're if they are animals, I don't think it's a psychic thing or them phasing out into another dimension that is why the pictures are blurry. I think it's that they're standing there, they're tensing their muscles, and they are imperceptibly shaking. We can't see it with our eyes, but the camera picks that up, just like it does with my dog. I can't see her shake. I think I've got a great picture. And I look at her face is all blurred. I'm like, how did you even do that? You weren't moving. But she did it imperceptibly. She tensed because she doesn't like getting pictures taken. And she made it fuzzy for me. I think that they would be able to do the same thing.
I would not be surprised. I mean, there has to be something to why the sightings occur in the way they do. Even with the pictures sightings when you don't have a camera, I'm there one they're there 1 second, gone the next. They don't always appear clear in the picture, so they're doing something, whether it's intentional or otherwise. I often wonder if something with their hair makes it more difficult for us to see, because human vision is actually quite terrible.
Yeah.
And there are some animals like like tree owls that can kind of adjust to the shade of a tree and they can blend in quite well. Who's to say that a Sasquatch can't do the same? Because the truth is, we don't know what their capabilities are. And, we share 99% of our DNA. Actually, I think it's 99.7% of our DNA with a chimpanzee. And that one chromosome is clearly a huge difference. So even if we share 99% or 98% of our DNA with a Sasquatch, who knows what that other chromosome or two could have done to their evolution, giving them, I don't want to use the word ability, but just kind of an advantage in nature, making them the ultimate predator. Because they are the top of the food chain. I mean, ultimately, if they wanted to hurt us, they could. They're massive, So But there does seem to be some reason, because so many people say, well, they were there one second and gone next. I
They're
lean
quick.
towards a psychological explanation, especially the first time you see one. I mean, I said when we talked earlier, I ran like hell. So did my friend PJ. Like, we took off running. We were scared out of our minds. We were 16 years old and come up in this thing that's almost 10 feet tall. And it's just kind of like, it's not supposed to be there. And
Right.
the only thing we knew is we need to get out of there. You know what I mean? And when it moved and walked towards us, when we stopped and we met at the head of a trail, it could have caught us if it wanted to. It chose not to. And I
It was
don't
just
know if
scaring
it
you away.
disappeared or blended in. Yeah, I think it was more curious than anything else. But so many people see him there 1 second, gone the next. And I've said before, like, there could have been 10 Sasquatches in the woods that night. Once I saw that one, I became so hyper focused on getting back to civilization
Right.
and running. I could have run past 10 of them, and I probably wouldn't have even looked out of the side of my head. I wouldn't have seen them. I just wouldn't
And
have
your
even
brain
caught it. Wouldn't have
freezes up.
registered. Yeah.
Your
Oh,
brain
absolutely.
absolutely freezes up, and I lose time. I would lose time when that would happen, and I wouldn't know, how long it was, and just, it could have been seconds, it could have been hours. And like, I have no recollection of talking to my dad that night. Ted had to tell me about that. I remember running out of the woods and waking up, like opening my eyes after I saw it walk away, opening my eyes on the floor of Jimmy's bedroom. But and they're quick. They're so quick. And we like if there's that again, maybe it's pheromones making you like, okay, you don't see me, or your brain stops working and it freezes up and you're like, oh crap, what just happened? You're trying to figure it out. Your brain's not moving fast enough to process what you're seeing. So that's why they look like they're there and then just disappear. And their
Yeah.
fur is like a living ghillie suit.
I agree. I think it's a combination of a psychological factor. I think that these creatures are at home in the woods much more so than we are, especially the further we develop in society, the more detached we get back from the old ways where humans were accustomed to being in the woods, and you might notice stuff and you weren't surprised. But these things live in the woods. They know where every tree is. They know where every hole is.
Oh,
You know,
absolutely.
and if you turn your eyes around for 1 second, they move so fast. But not only that, once you see one, you're looking for a 9-10 foot creature out there. You're scanning the woods, looking around. In my opinion, they could be smart enough to lay down. They could go to another spot. I think they know how to just kind of blend in with the environment. And, part of the psychological factor, I think, is that we're taught our entire lives that we're the top of the food chain. There's nothing out there with the right equipment that, if we had the right equipment, that can hurt us. We're untouchable. We're the top of the food chain. We rule the planet, blah, blah, blah. So when you see something like this, you get this overwhelming sensation because everything you've been told your entire life is that it just got proved wrong, right? Because you see this massive creature, they're fast, they're strong, they seem to be agile. They can do things that we can't. So your fight or flight instincts, I think, kick in, and I think your brain just goes down to, for lack of a better term, you go to the lizard brain.
Yeah.
And that section probably lights up and says, okay, this thing is here, it exists. Worry about that later. Where's the safest indoor place? Where are there other humans? Where is there somewhere to get away from this thing? And then you just go into auto drive. But yeah, I've talked to people who have said they've seen orbs, and I spoke with someone yesterday about, she was telling me about portals that she's seen and how they travel through, come and go through portals. And I'm not saying they do or they don't. I don't. I personally think there's a more biological explanation for it, but I'm completely prepared to be proven wrong. If somebody takes me out to the woods and say, watch this, and they go through a portal, then consider me
Oh,
convinced.
me too.
But,
Absolutely.
I think it's more likely that there's a psychological evidence and a biological evidence, and those two things combined. Right now, as far as the orbs go, I don't have an explanation for that. I don't know that if they're creating them, maybe. I don't know how they would do it. We have no one's ever reported saying, "Oh, they had a flashlight," or like, for example, when you said they traipsed through they traipsed through your campsite when you were camping. They took food, but they probably didn't take anything else.
Nope.
So it would be unlikely to me that they would have some kind of ability to generate a light source, an orb, if you will, that without some kind of technology, and there's no evidence that they use any kind of technology or any kind of tools. Not to say that they don't. I'm just saying, in people I've talked to in my own experiences, I've never seen that anything to lead me to believe that they do that. Now, in regards to the mind speak, my biggest question is always, how come everyone hears it in their native language?
Right.
You know what I mean? We don't even know if there are. Yeah, and that's the thing is, with the mind speak, what gets me is if you have images, that makes more sense to me because we're both looking at the same thing. But we don't even know if they're capable of pronouncing our speech patterns. We have no idea what their vocal cords are like, or their voice, or their ability to speak. I don't doubt that they can understand our actions and things like that, but I don't know what their level of communication is. And I also don't know that there's enough documentation on their behavior to really create a pattern for their logic. What would make sense to us as humans may not even factor in for them. They may have a completely different outlook on logic and decision making than we've ever dreamed of. Not to say that they're right or wrong. I just think it's different. So I don't. That goes back to why I don't think they necessarily use technology. I think they live in harmony with the wilderness. I think that they take what they need. I think they move around, and that's not just me. If you go back to Native American lore, the First Nations people in Canada, where the term Sasquatch comes from, they talk about these other tribes of man as they refer to them, and they say, right, they live in harmony with the woods. Were they communicating? I don't know. There's the Orang Pendek in Indonesia that the villagers on that island swear up and down for generations that the Orang Pendek is basically their version of Sasquatch, but they describe them as having spears. Maybe they're also only like 4 or 5 feet tall, which is not a typical Sasquatch, but typically, with the exception of the Komodo dragon and I think the grizzly bears up in Alaska, the Kodiak Island bears, most species in a confined space get smaller over time. So if a group of Sasquatches somehow got trapped on that island 10,000 years ago, it makes sense that they would have gotten smaller because there's only so much space on an island. You can't expand.
Right. And if they're using spears...
maybe... Well, that's my thing. I'm thinking, assuming that is an accurate statement from the local people, they're saying they use spears, things like that. If their size had changed, I think they would adapt to their environment. Here in North America, there's millions of miles or millions of acres, tens of millions, really. Plus, you have Canada. I mean, there's no need for them to adapt. There's no need for them to pick up a skill. I don't think they have a need for it. And I don't know that their logic works the same as ours, where they say, what can I do to make life easier? I have a suspicion that they're more animal-like in that way, where they just kind of do what they've always done and they continue to do it because it works.
Right. And the Orang Pendek, that would have hit a bottleneck as far as evolution. And it would have forced an evolution through that bottleneck. If they're using spears, that could also mean, that my one theory that they're an extant species of hominid. They're a genus of, or a species of Homo, the Homo genus that we haven't seen yet. That would explain a lot with using tools, like Homo habilis. So, and we always think of everything being small, like Lucy, like Australopithecus, but some of the early human species were huge.
Well, and even today, I'm 6'8". I sometimes meet taller. It's very rare, but I do meet taller people that are taller than I am. we're out there. So the height gene is out there. And in my opinion, people as a whole are getting taller. The reason I say that is I wear a 17. I've worn a 17 for over 20 years. And it used to be almost impossible to find shoes. And now it's almost like everyone else. I can even go to occasionally a store will have them, more than one.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean? It used to be every giant in the Cleveland area all shopped at one place in Rocky River. Now there's a half a dozen stores that carry 15, 16, size 17, just standard. And that was not the case years ago. In the 90s, it was like a week expedition to find clothes, shoes, and it would be like a pair of pants here because there just wasn't that many of us up here. And now that seems to have changed. But, from my research, there are something like 24 distinctive species that existed of some kind of human form at one point. Some were Cro-Magnon, Neanderthal, some were more ape-like, some were other things. They inbred. Depending on where you're from in the world, you probably carry junk DNA, anywhere from 3 to 5% of a race of basically extinct humanoids that the race bred in or got killed or both. And I agree. I've had the same theory for some time. I think it's possible that one of those species did in fact survive and adapt. And the one thing that jumps out to me is that for large primates, typically they only reproduce roughly every 7 to 9 years. They carry about the same time as a human. You're talking 9-10 months, but they just don't reproduce for whatever reason at the same rate we do. And if that's something that stayed with them, and perhaps there's a reason for that in their evolution, that's what allows them to keep their population in balance, But if a Sasquatch has that same 7 to 9 years, assuming they have similar to a human span, give or take, they might only have 1 or 2 kids in a lifetime, whereas you have people out there that are popping out 10 kids in a lifetime. You know what I mean?
Right.
And we're multiplying like rabbits, but we probably outnumbered them. And that may have been where all this started, evolutionary speaking, 100,000 to 300,000 years ago. Their ancestors probably learned it was safer to avoid us at all costs because even though they're stronger, we outnumber them, and we're probably more violent than they are. We're the only species that will kill another member of our own species for pleasure. You know what I mean? There's clearly some crooked DNA floating around in the human genome, but that doesn't mean it's affected them. Their evolutionary path could have been very different. So I think that's an absolute possibility that something is out there. And I think the giant Pithecus is not necessarily off either. Supposedly there's no primates have ever been discovered in North America. And I said, and my answer to that is, okay, then how come when the Europeans settled in the U.S. and Canada, the native population had cave drawings, totem poles, stories handed down, the Europeans said, oh, that's an ape or that's a primate. How would a Native American or any native population of the United States or Canada know what a primate looks like to tell those stories in detail that someone from a European colony would say, that must be some kind of primate like in Africa. They probably have those here too. They had to have seen something to create that story, to give that detail, to paint those drawings, to carve the pictures. They were seeing something, you know what I'm saying? And for the Europeans to look at a totem pole and say, oh, that's some kind of ape. Okay, well, then how would they know that? You know what I mean? They had to have seen it.
Right, yeah. And like, who was it? Leif Erikson, when he landed on the coast of Canada and talked about the large hairy creatures that were throwing rocks at the boats that did not want them to come ashore. What are those? They're not, are they natives in skins? But they were taller than Erikson's own Vikings. So, where did they come from?
Yeah, and that's the thing is, and I've had this debate with the skeptic before, and the gentleman said, well, how would, how that doesn't make sense because they all know about, it makes sense because they all pass down stories and migrate in different tribes of people interact with each other. And I said, okay, to some degree, but if you have a native population in, say, Florida and a native population in Washington, how come they have the same stories? What are the chances that 10,000 years ago, when there's no highways, there's no roads, it's thick woods, you have no idea what the weather is on the other side of the country to prepare for it, nor what kind of season you're going to head into, especially if you're coming from Florida, and you're migrating perhaps northwest. At a certain point in time, you're going to hit a season you probably didn't know existed.
Right.
So or Alaska's an even better example than Washington. How could they have stories the same people that a tribe in Florida would have? I'm sure it's not impossible, but I would imagine the odds would have to be astronomical that a small group would survive all the way from Alaska to Florida and then somehow figure out how to get back to where they came from. How would you even begin without a road system? You know what I mean? So how could they have interacted? And, is it possible they've interacted? I'm sure it is. Is it likely? In my opinion, no. I just don't see how they could have done it. So the fact that they're all seeing something different, but yet the oral history sounds almost not identical, but close enough where you can be, okay, this is the same story that this guy's saying, and these other people are saying over here. But they're 10,000 miles apart in a time when they should not have been able to access each other. So unless we're missing something and there was some way that they were traveling and communicating and exchanging information, cultural information, because the other thing too is the native populations didn't necessarily get along with each other. So they're not necessarily out there sharing their life story either.
Right.
So that's always been one of my biggest things with skeptic. It's just, the Native American lore is so precise about the wild man or the hairy man that they had to have seen something. And it's technically not evidence, but in my opinion, it's a statement. It's a witness statement. You're hearing generational stories that go back hundreds of thousands of years before there were ever European settlers here. But then you have the Yeti in the Himalayas. Even in Europe, they have the occasional Sasquatch sighting. You have them in Africa. So how is the story getting around the globe? Now I get it. It makes sense, but you can find newspaper articles and books written 150 years ago about these things. So there's something to it. People are seeing something in the woods. You know what I mean?
Well, yeah, and the Aboriginals in Australia, they've had stories of the Yowie for literally 1,000+ years. When Europeans first got to the coast of Australia, the Aboriginals were telling stories about the Yowie. That is the most, remote continent not connected by anything since the last ice age, which was what, 10,000-20,000 years ago, when the Bering Strait was the Bering Land Bridge. So obviously something came over those when the seas were lower. How they have that story, the same as the indigenous populations of North America.
It seems like in indigenous and the native lore that the Sasquatches were here first. They sometimes describe them as being older than us. They're a different tribe. They're set aside from us somehow. And so that makes me think that they were here first. Perhaps they are older than humanity. And unfortunately, until we get a body and get our paws on some DNA, we're not going to have the answer to that one. But
true,
it's definitely enough, in my opinion, circumstantial evidence where it would be worth for a government agency or a private agency to sink some money into really doing some real investigation, get some people that can run DNA, that can really measure these footprints, that can do a diagram. Basically, we need about 10 Dr. Meldrums, But what's
you get into conspiracies as to why we're not doing that. And the National Park Service was set up by Teddy Roosevelt to protect the Sasquatch population, so we didn't get another black eye from destroying another tribe of natives. stuff. And so the government is really protecting it. That's why the Smithsonian swoops in and takes bodies from Mount St. Helens in their black helicopters. So you get
I
into
was
this
just going to bring that up.
conspiracy level stuff. Yeah.
Yeah, it just seems odd. Why would people make that up? Of all things to make up, and it wasn't just one person that said, "Oh, I saw him taking a body out." There was multiple people that are saying these black helicopters were there doing something. They were bringing something out of there. The question is what and why. And no one. Unfortunately, we didn't have cell phone cameras back then, so nobody got any pictures of it happening. Because today, that would be the biggest. That would be difficult to refute today. It's easy to say back then because there's no proof. But at the same time, when so many different people see something, whether it was a Sasquatch or something else, clearly there was something being done, something was being moved, something was there,
Right.
And hopefully in the coming years that'll be one of those mysteries that'll get declassified, give us some answers. But what do you think about other cryptids?
Okay. Where do I start? Wendigo. I believe that a Wendigo is possible. Grandkids have been playing 99 Nights in the Woods or something. I guess that's the new Roblox type game where there is a giant deer walking on two legs that will attack you after the first night if you're out in the woods alone without light. That's obviously a Wendigo, but I believe that could very well be true. There are too many stories, especially in through the indigenous tribes and First Nations, but also from older people in Eastern Europe, like not the Western European countries, England. People are like, oh, no such thing as that, ha ha ha. But we've got older people that came in from Eastern Europe in the Ural Mountains and around the Black Sea and places like that, and Italy and like around the Mediterranean that will talk about, we get the stories of the fairies and the witches and um, vampires and things like that, which I believe, despite being a skeptic about Bigfoot, about a lot of things Bigfoot, and maybe it's because I care more about Bigfoot and I want the evidence to be, super, just absolutely superb. But other things like witchcraft and folk remedies and fairies and things like that, I will wholesale go out and go, yeah, I believe in that. It makes sense to me because the stories are so old, and I've heard older people, people's boobies and people's grandmothers and their babushkas that will tell these stories, and I believe them. It's like I'm Jewish, so in Jewish tradition we have the tradition of the golem. The most famous is Rabbi Lowe, um, from Prague, who created a golem and kept him in. I think it's either the new old synagogue or the old new synagogue. I can't remember which way the first two words go, but kept him in the attic of that building, but brought him out when the people of Prague and the Prince of Prague was doing pogroms against the Jews to try and get them out of the city and kill them off, or whatever. So the golem was protecting them. I totally believe that. I believe that he would have some esoteric knowledge to be able to bring a clump of mud to life to protect the people. So a story about the Wendigo, that's what happens when you and whether it's you believe in the Abrahamic religions and think it's going against God, or you believe in the more native type religions and believe it's against nature and the Great Spirit, and you're eating human flesh, yeah, something bad's going to happen to you. For most people, it's they get shaky and the something in human flesh makes them like deteriorate, especially mentally. But that something even worse could happen and you could turn into a walking monster with deer antlers. I don't think that's a story just to scare kids. Skinwalkers, I totally would believe that a person has knowledge of this world through the other side of a veil, that that they can go into, that a witch or a medicine man can go into and take this power and shapeshift. A skinwalker can turn into a wolf or a dog or a deer or a rabbit. I don't necessarily think they're evil. I think that it's just a shape shifting, skill that could be learned. I believe that you hear stories about the magician Merlin, but like the older stories about him when he was still Merlin Emrys from Wales, before the whole Arthurian legends, and that he could start fire by snapping his fingers. I believe there's probably magic in the world that we don't see. As kids, we see it all the time. We believe in the Tooth Fairy. We believe in the Easter Bunny. We believe in Santa Claus. We see magic through the veil. It's like the Flintstones when they brought in the Great Gazoo, and the only two people that could see him, adults, were Fred and Barney because they were stupid. But Pebbles and Bam Bam and Dino could see, so animals and babies could see him too, because they could see through the veil. So I believe there is. I don't think Bigfoot is magic. I think Bigfoot's just a natural creature, and there's a scientific explanation. But I believe that there are some things that we can't explain with science that are magic. That maybe there really is a Hogwarts that I haven't gotten my letter to yet, or maybe there's something out there. I've seen things that I can't explain scientifically. Orbs could be a remnant of that magic. They could be fairies. Sometimes when you're little, you see through the veil, and a dragonfly isn't a dragonfly. It's a little fairy wearing shiny armor, like rainbow colored shiny armor. A butterfly isn't a butterfly. It's a fairy wrapped in a beautiful cloak. You don't see a bullfrog sitting on a stone. You see a troll sitting there waiting for a fly to come by so he can eat it. So things like that, other cryptids, I absolutely 100% and scientifically believe in a chupacabra. I believe that the stories are true, because I'm also a big conspiracy theorist. And now the other half of your listeners are just going, I knew it. I knew that guy was crazy. But I believe that the American military, DARPA or whatever, created the chupacabra in a Puerto Rican lab, and then it got loose. Several of them got loose. Maybe they found a Jersey devil and they tried to genetically modify it to use for some sort of biological warfare. But I absolutely believe the stories of the chupacabra. I believe, and then there's other things that are cryptids that we don't think about. When we hear the word cryptid, we think Bigfoot, Sasquatch, Dogman, which I think is just a werewolf. I don't think it's, a dog man. I think it's just a misidentified werewolf. And what's the problem? It's a full moon. The guy turns into a wolf. Leave him alone. He's just going out to get some meat. That's all. He's hungry. Leave him be.
He's going out to dinner.
But we think of things like that. But what we don't realize are also cryptids. Besides things like a plesiosaur in a lake, I think they're finding out now that the lock system in Scotland, there are underground tunnels leading to other locks. So Nessie doesn't necessarily have to be stuck in Loch Ness. And how is there one for hundreds of years? Wouldn't it have died off? There has to be a breeding population. Maybe there is up in the ocean near the what are they, the ski islands, the Isles of Ski. I think they don't pronounce it sky. I think they pronounce it ski. But up northern Scotland, they may be living up there in the water, and they come down into the locks in the warmer water to fish. So there may be a breeding population in deep waters that we can't find. But also alligators in the sewers of New York. Oh, that's just a myth. But people did flush their Ninja Turtles and their alligators down toilets when they got too big. They went to Florida. They bought it at a roadside stand. It started getting too big. They either flushed it or threw it down in a sewer. Why couldn't it survive? It would eat rats. Gators are pretty, it gets cold, but in the sewers, it wouldn't get that cold in the winter. There are steam vents down there. The humans that live in the old subway tunnels that are below the modern subway tunnels and the old steam vents, like on that old show Beauty and the Beast, that are living underneath the city in New York. Or what are they? The Morlocks from Marvel Comics or from the Time Machine. Yeah, H.G.
Yeah.
Wells' Time Machine and the Morlocks living underground in the sewers. They're cryptids because you don't really see them. We know they're homeless down there, but there's whole societies down there that use electricity, grow their own food, have their own, TV or radio stations or whatever communication systems that have been living down there probably for hundreds of years. They steal things from topside, they take it down there, they make it for their own use. But they are down there. They're cryptids because most people don't think they exist. Um, Things like the coelacanth, the Ocampi, um, which people think, oh, the Ocampi, that can't exist. It's not an antelope mixed with a giraffe. Are you kidding me? No, but it's real. It was a cryptid. The coelacanth was a cryptid. It's thought to be extinct, but it's not. It's still living. We're finding more and more animals that were thought to be extinct that are one of the biggest non-cryptid cryptids right now is the Tasmanian tiger in Australia and in Tasmania. People are seeing them on trail cams. They are still alive. The last one didn't die in a zoo because the zookeeper was careless and let him starve. They are out there. Like, well, until we find a body or we catch one. Why? Don't. It's on video evidence. They're on trail cams. That's not a dingo. That's a Tasmanian tiger. It looks completely different. So they are out there. The dinosaur in Africa that we couldn't find for years, we're just finding out now through reading older stories that were written down by some of the native tribes. It's just a rhinoceros. We thought it was a triceratops that was still alive. No, it's just a rhinoceros. That's unicorns. When you see people that are religious and read the Bible and they see the word in the Greek unicorn, that didn't mean a horse with a horn on it. Maybe it did. Maybe they were just finding narwhal teeth, washed up on shore and thought, oh, this is a unicorn horn. But all it meant was a rhinoceros. Same word in Greek for both. But there are cryptids out there that we don't realize are cryptids. The gorilla was a cryptid until 1902. Nobody believed it existed. The billy ape was a cryptid until 20 years ago, even though it's an adapted subspecies of chimpanzee, not the bonobos. The bonobos have actually become genetically diverse enough to become its own subspecies, like the difference between an Asian and an African elephant. But they're still out there. I believe that they're out there. Some of them are a little too crazy even for me. But they're out there, and I would love to find evidence. But the other part of me, the naturalist in me, just wants to leave them alone. Let them live.
What do you think is the most far out?
Honestly, for me, and I know a lot of people don't agree with it, but for me, the most ridiculous one is the dog man. I don't know. I believe in Bigfoot because I've seen it. Dog man, I have a harder time believing in because there people that you talk to that believe in it will tell you absolutely 100% it is not a werewolf. It is not a human turning into a wolf or a human turning into a dog. These are a separate creature. They're vicious. They're territorial. I don't know. I just don't know about that one. I love the legends of dog soldiers from the indigenous peoples, but those were werewolf like. Those were were dogs. People turning into dogs. In Asia, we have stories of were tigers. We have stories of were lions in Africa, or were panthers. So the stories exist across all continents, all over the world, of humans turning into these animals. Dogman as a distinct species that never turns back into a human, I don't know if I buy it.
Yeah, my biggest objection, and I'm not saying they're not out there. I've been to Michigan a couple of times looking for myself, trying to get a picture of one or a Sasquatch, whichever I happen to stumble across first. But Michigan specifically, I'm always on the eye out for keeping my eyes open for a dog. But for two large mammals to exist in North America that are bipedal, walking upright, that I sometimes wonder if people are mistakenly identifying a Sasquatch as a dog man, or they're just, maybe it's a bear with mange. What I saw, I believe, was a Sasquatch. I can't prove it, but that's my belief. And until someone convinces me otherwise, that's what I'm going with. But for there to be a separate species out there that's essentially has just as many sightings as Sasquatch, or is just as large, it seems like it would be unlikely that two would slip under the radar. One I get.
Evolutionarily, it just doesn't make sense.
But talking on both sides of my mouth for a second, in Vietnam, one of their biggest cities, they found, I can't remember what the damn thing was called, but that they found it was some kind of primate that wasn't supposed to exist, that the locals said was there forever. And of course, it wasn't supposed to be. It might have been. It was more one, because there's a massive city right there, and then they discovered there's a population of 250,000 minimal out in the jungle there that no one had seen, while this entire city was destroying their habitat. And that's probably the only reason we eventually ended up discovering them to begin with. But that's happened before.
Right.
Where there's a large city and then all of a sudden we discover something that's not supposed to be there and should never have existed, yet there it is. And somehow we missed it for the last 200 years. So it does happen. But then as I talk to people who have seen Dogman, I believe that they believe what they're saying. You can, how sometimes when you talk to a witness, they're terrified, and you can see it. Their face changes, the color drains out when they talk about these experiences. So I have no doubt that something scared the living hell out of them in the woods. I'm just not sure what it was. But they are, and if I saw one, I would have the same thing. So I go back and forth on it, because on one hand, I think, is it possible there's two of them? I'm pretty sure what I saw was a Sasquatch. However, could we all be seeing the same thing and it not be either? Maybe. I don't know. But that's an interesting hypothesis when you had mentioned about werewolves or skinwalkers, because I've wondered that if skinwalkers are perhaps one or both. Maybe that's why. And I don't know what the reason is why they would change into one as to another, if there's some kind of physical advantage that it grants them, or if it's something where you have a certain ability to become one thing and not another. There's so many unanswered questions out there. But the more you dig deep in, or the more you dive in deep and dig around, looking for answers, sometimes it raises more questions. You know what I mean? And I guess Dogman to me is one of those things where I get both sides of the argument, where some people say there's no way, but you and I have seen a Sasquatch. Had we not, we probably, at least I would have still been a believer either way, but I would have certainly been much more likely to dismiss most of what I've seen and heard over the years.
True. Yeah.
You know what I mean? So, and again, there's also a psychological factor to it. You see something that you're not used to seeing. The one thing that with the Dogman sightings that always gets me, and I've heard the mange bear, I've seen pictures of it. It sure as hell looks like a Dogman, but I've never heard of a bear that can walk down a road or a street on two legs, right? They may take a few steps, go a few feet even, but eventually they're ending up on all fours when they're moving. The one thing with the Dogman encounters that always stands out is that people say they remain on two legs. And when they either come after them or they run from them or disappear, they do it on two legs. And even if the bear had mange, I feel like it would still go to all four. If it was scared, that's the safest, most efficient way. Right. And plus, from my understanding, is I've never seen the bear, and maybe they can, I've just never seen a video, but my understanding is the bear's not going to go more than a few feet on two legs before it drops down and kind of, takes off. But they're not very fast on two legs, bears either. That's why they go to all fours. They're incredibly fast. So that's another factor that jumps out at me. But then on the other hand, I keep saying, well, what are the chances there are two massive species that evolved right under our noses?
Right.
And but at the same time, everybody is glued to a cell phone. So we
Yeah,
have
that's
the
true.
technology to capture the stuff, but no one's paying attention enough to see it.
Yeah, and another possibility, Bigfoot looked different in different areas. I went, back to my, you know, calling them different races of Sasquatch or Bigfoot or different different breeds or whatever. The ones in the American Southwest are said to be very thin, maybe 6 to 7 feet tall, but just like skinny, how a dog man would look. What if they're taking, you know, uh, a coyote carcass and putting it over their head? Excuse me. Or what if they're a skinwalker and a shape changer? Native Americans have the story of coyote, the trickster god, which is the same as the Celtic god Puck, um, and the Norse god Loki. The trickster god coyote was a shapeshifter, and he goes across a lot of indigenous Western tribes. So it's not just one tribe going, oh, this is our god. Coyote goes through a lot of tribes west of the Mississippi.
Yeah, I agree completely. I think there's still too many unanswered questions. I think there's circumstantial evidence to support multiple theories, and unfortunately, it always goes back to until we get a body, we're never really going to be sure. That said, I would never encourage anyone to harm a Sasquatch. I would like to find one that's perhaps recently deceased from natural causes, but
Right.
it's you know I know that because sometimes you say, well, I'm going to go, because that's the thing is if they, and I've wondered that with the government too, if the government's aware of them and they don't tell us, because what's the first thing people are going to do? Every hunter on earth is going to be out of the woods looking for
And a lot of states are
them.
making it illegal to hunt Sasquatch in their legislatures. They're passing laws. Whether they do it as a joke or not, there are serious anti hunting laws for this creature.
That, yeah, and that's the thing. And I was having a conversation with somebody about that yesterday, and or yeah, Monday, and I question why they would do that. That's a lot of time and effort for a joke if there's not a reason behind it. You know what I mean? If someone's not saying this needs to be on the books, but maybe they are. You know what I mean? Just because it doesn't make sense to you and me doesn't mean it's not necessarily funny to somebody else. But it raises a lot of questions, and there's I could talk about Sasquatch for a million years, but we're coming up on the 2 hour mark, so probably wrap things up here. Is there any shout outs or anything you want to talk about before we go?
I shouted out Ted's T Max American Experience on YouTube and Facebook. I should be putting together, hopefully soon, God willing, now that the kids are back in school, um, some reaction videos to some of his and analyzing some of his hikes and some of his. There's a couple of them that love to throw rocks at him every time he goes into a certain area. Every single time he gets rocks thrown at him. And he's been solo. He's gone out with our friend John. He's gone out with other folks that have confirmed that there's nobody else out there that they know of. Something is throwing rocks at them. As for me, there's not much on it yet, but I do have a Facebook page called The Other Side of the Woods. Basically, every time some kind of an encounter happened that we heard or smelled something, where'd that come from? Oh, the other side of the woods. So I do post on that occasionally. Ted posts a lot of his stuff on that, so it's easier to find there. I should be by October, kind of ripping off, and I know people are going to say I'm trying to rip off Wes, but I'm not. If I'm stealing from anyone, it's Nuri and Coast to Coast AM. But I'm working now on building an IceCast radio show, and then I'll have it on YouTube as well. For it's also called The Other Side of the Woods, but it's basically going to be a live call-in show that you can listen to right here on the internet 4 or 5 nights a week, as opposed to a podcast where I pre-record and then load everything up. This will be live. You can call in, you can interact, and look for probably in about 2 months on Amazon KDP a book called Wooshuk, Wooshuk. Once I finish writing it, which I'm not far, I swear, people, I'm not far. That's for the people that have been waiting for over a year for it. But that tells my experience of what happened when I was 6, and all of the experiences I had in a fictional manner. But I also go into who is the female Bigfoot that I met, and I imagine what her life was like from being born to her first discovery of humans, to her lifelong obsession with them, to her adopting a little human boy and protecting him in the woods for those summers when, because they left in the wintertime to go south for different food sources, but they came back every summer because there's fish and deer and berries and vegetables all over the place, corn and tomatoes and stuff. But they would come back up every year. And it gets to the end of her life and how her greatest wish is to see her human child once more before she passes away. So it's kind of emotional. It is told from it's a fictional true story is how I dub it. But I'll be probably at first self-producing that through KDP, just so I can get it out and take it with me to some of the conventions and put it on a website and stuff. And then once I get it built, the website where you can find all of my crap will be, oh my gosh, it's either, I think I need to get the domain name. So it'll be squatchburgusa.com. It's not up yet, folks. It's still under construction, but that's Squatchburg with a U, no H like Pittsburgh, but BURG USA.com. So that's where all my stuff will be eventually, hopefully in the next couple of weeks, when I get the WordPress.org site built from scratch.
Excellent. I'm looking forward to seeing that. I'm looking forward to your book too. And please let me know once your book comes out. We'd love to have you back on and tell us about the book and kind of, what went into it, some of your experiences in the book, maybe read a couple passages from it, just get some exposure for it.
Yeah, it should have been done by now, but for most of the summer, grandson decided he wanted to stay the night most nights because he got to play on my phone and play his Roblox account. His main account is on my phone for some reason, and he can't remember the passwords because he just does random numbers. I can't remember it, and we can't see what it is, so he's stuck using my phone. So he was staying the night a lot. Plus, it got him away from his sister. He could watch YouTube videos all night and play on his VR and stuff. So I didn't have any time because they have a tendency to, the granddaughter sleepwalks. The grandson has a tendency to just kind of wander outside. So I was sleeping down on the couch every night that he was here. I couldn't get up to my desk to actually work on the book. So hopefully now that they're back in school, I can take a couple hours every day, finish it in the next few weeks, get it formatted and published, and then hopefully it's a good read. I've got a couple of pre-readers set, including my friend. That's another plug, unsolicited plug, Timothy Wayne Williams. Check him out. TW Williams Fine Art.com, I think is his website, but he's TW Williams Fine Art and Timothy Wayne Williams on Facebook. My favorite living painter, or my favorite living artist, period, and a good friend and a great guy in the Bigfoot community.
Excellent. I will definitely check him out. And then, yeah. And like I said, once your book is ready to publish, let me know. We'll get you back on here. We'll talk about it.
Oh, absolutely. I'm looking forward to making the rounds with that.
And then in the meantime, thank you for coming on and sharing your experiences with us. And if you just want to hang on backstage, I'm going to wrap up here.
All right. Thank you for having me.
Thank you, sir. Talk to you in a few. All right. That was Ken, Sasquatch witness, investigator, and researcher, lifelong experiencer. Really interesting guy. A lot of information. Please check us out in probably around November after his book comes out, assuming he gets it done. November, December, we'll have him back on. We'll talk about his book. We will have the Amazon link for it too by then. And thank you for watching.